In a remote period of American history, at an indent on the eastern shore of the Hudson River, there lies a small market town whose name was given, we are told, in former days by the good housewives of the village, who noted their husbands' propensity to linger or tarry about the main tavern on market days. This village is called Tarrytown. Not far from the village, there is a little valley among the high hills, which is one of the quietest places in the whole world. A drowsy little Dutch settlement, long known as Sleepy Hollow. There are some who say that this enchanted region was bewitched by a high German doctor during the early days of the settlement. Others say that a woman in white cries for her long-lost beloved in the woods and cursed the very grounds themselves. Certain it is that some power held over the minds of the good people. The whole neighborhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. The dominant spirit, however, who seems to be commander of all the powers of the air, is an apparition of a figure on horseback without a head. It is said by some to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head had been carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War, and who is ever and anon seen by the country folk hurrying along in the gloom of night as if on the wings of the wind. Now, it happened that a very peculiar schoolteacher came to Sleepy Hollow. His name was Ichabod Crane, and to see him striding along with his tattered clothes fluttering about him, one might have mistaken him for the specter of famine descending upon the earth. His schoolhouse on an autumn day buzzed with the low murmur of his pupils, interrupted now and then by the stern voice of the schoolmaster. Ichabod's scholars were not spoiled, and all of this he called doing his duty. He was not, as you may have imagined, one of those cruel potentates of the school who'd joy in the smarting of his subjects. He administered justice with discrimination rather than civility. When school hours were over, he would often walk a student home, especially the ones who had mothers who were noted for the comforts of the cupboard. Knowing that his rustic patrons were apt to consider schoolmasters as mere drones, he would often make himself useful and agreeable. Then, late at night, sitting by the fire, he listened to the old Dutch wives' tales. Tales of ghosts and goblins and haunted fields, and especially the tale of the Headless Horseman. By listening, all snug by the chimney, Ichabod was only mildly apprehensive. But afterward, in his walk homeward, what fearful shapes and shadows beset his path! Among Ichabod's musical disciples was Katrina Van Tassel. the daughter and only heir of a substantial Dutch farmer. On his way to her house, Ichabod rolled his great eyes over her father's fat meadowlands. In his devouring mind's eye, he pictured to himself every duck roasted succulent brown, each little porker with an apple in its mouth, strutting turkeys on plates swimming in gravy. Oh, how he sighed and yearned for the blooming Katrina Van Tassel. Who was to inherit all these domains? Ichabod's most formidable rival was Brom Bones, who was the hero of the countryside and Katrina's suitor. Ichabod loved to watch her sweet, tender face form round vowels. Brom fumed with jealousy, but he knew he could not regain Katrina's affections by physically assaulting an obviously weaker opponent. So, he employed his natural inclination for fun and mischief. Katrina sent Brom away, and Brom left, but he vowed revenge. Ichabod rejoiced. Katrina had just brushed aside the main impediment to his pursuit of her affections. Sometime in late autumn, Ichabod was handed a note. An invitation to attend a party at the Van Tassel mansion. Ichabod imagined himself in the true style of a cavalier. He saw an admiring Van Tassel bestowing upon him his total wealth. He was certain that tonight he would win the heiress's hand. Ichabod, gallantly mounted on a borrowed steed, lurched along towards the Van Tassel estate. When he entered, the conquest of his heart was complete. A world of charm burst upon his enraptured gaze, not those of the bevy of buxom lasses, but the ample charms of a genuine Dutch country table. Ichabod was a peculiar creature whose spirit rose with eating as some do with drink. Ichabod prided himself on his dancing as much as on his vocal powers. Not a limb nor a fiber about him was idle. To see his loosely hung frame in full motion clattering about the room, you would think St. Vitus himself was whirling before you in person. He was the admiration of all present, except Brom Bones. The lady of his heart, Katrina, was then his partner in the dance, and smiling graciously in reply to all his amorous oglings, while Brom Bones, sorely smitten with love and jealousy, stood brooding by himself. When the dance was at an end, Ichabod was attracted to a group of older folks who sat and doled out their wild and wonderful legends. Many dismal tales were told about funeral trains and cries and wailings. Some mention was made about the woman in white who haunted the dark glen at Raven Rock. She was often heard to shriek on winter nights before a storm, having perished there in the snow. Seeing Ichabod trembling at every limb, Brom Bones immediately added a tale of his own. An encounter with their favorite specter, the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. He affirmed that returning one night from a neighboring village, he had been overtaken by the midnight trooper himself. He raced home, and just as they came to the church bridge, the headless horseman bolted and vanished in a flash of fire. To Brahm's satisfaction and delight, Ichabod was terror-stricken. Ichabod lingered behind according to the custom of country lovers, fully convinced that he had won Katrina's heart. What passed between them, no one knows, but something went wrong. Was her encouragement of the poor pedagogue all a mere sham for her to secure the conquest of his rival? It was the very witching hour itself when Ichabod, heavy-hearted and crestfallen, pursued his way homeward. All the stories of ghosts and goblins now came crowding upon his recollections. The night grew darker and darker. He had never felt so lonely and dismal. He was, moreover, approaching the very place where many of the scenes of the ghost stories had been laid. Suddenly, a strange sound caught the sensitive ear of Ichabod. In the dark shadow of the grove, he beheld a huge, misshapen, black, towering mass, like some gigantic monster ready to spring upon him. Ichabod kicked the ribs of his borrowed steed and took off, his eyes closed in fright, willing the spectre away. Ichabod was momentarily relieved until he cautiously opened one eye and spied a horseman of large dimension trotting alongside him. Ichabod was horror-struck on perceiving that he was headless. An opening in the trees now cheered him with the hopes that the church bridge was at hand. He recollected the place where Brom Bones said the spectre had disappeared. If I can but reach that bridge, thought Ichabod, I am safe. Ichabod was never again seen in that region. Many stories were called to mind and considered and compared. But in the end, the old Dutch wives, who are the best judges in these matters, maintain that Ichabod was spirited away by the headless horseman. And to this day, it is a favorite story often told about the neighborhood.